new sinter is coming, and for our capstone project, we modeled the mechanisms of spark plasma sintering, or SPS, to study the processing conditions necessary to fabricate graphene silicon carbide composites. It was recently reported that graphene silicon carbide composites could potentially be fabricated through SPS of silicon carbide powder with in situ graphene formation. SPS is a novel method of powder consolidation through applied current and pressure. However, current models of SPS simulations are limited. The reason for graphene formation is also unknown. The goal of this project is to design a model of graphene formation and SPS simulation in order to study graphene silicon carbide fabrication for novel electrical and mechanical applications.
COMSOL Multiphysics 4.1 was utilized to simulate SPS mechanism and conditions. Joule heating, which consists of electric current and heat transfer, along with PDE modules, were used. Several simple verification tests were conducted to ensure COMSOL's accuracy and reliability. A final test based on the geometrics and conditions given in Oleski's 2012 paper were conducted in order to reproduce their results. All verification tests were successful. A geometry representation of the SPS at ARL was created in COMSOL with appropriate initials values and boundary conditions. Experimental SPS measurements were input into COMSOL to generate a result temperature and density profile. While temperature was fairly accurate, densification deviated.
A micro-mesoscale model of grain growth between discrete particles was carried out in MATLAB using a kinetic Monte Carlo and Metropolis algorithm. 3 processes were simulated using this algorithm: short-range grain growth by diffusion through grain boundaries, pore migration from surface diffusion, and vacancy annihilation. Our code is able to take into account the differences in magnitude between free and interfacial energies, as well as the curvature-driven grain growth due to the Gibbs-Thompson effect. We ran the code for 40,000 Monte Carlo steps in order to see the densification of the grains.
This plot shows the graphene formation model. The graphene formation occurs through the thermal desorption of silicon atoms from silicon carbide lattice. We developed an analytical model of thermal desorption based on the experimental values of S.K. Lilov's thermodynamic analysis of silicon carbide dissociation. This is a vapor pressure versus temperature plot that indicates when graphene can form. At temperatures and pressures below silicon dissociation line and above Si2C and SiC2 lines, the selective sublimation of silicon occurs, resulting in the remaining carbon atoms to form graphene.
For the micro-mesoscale grain evolution model, an image of the microstructure was outputted every 2,500 Monte Carlo time steps, for a total of 16 images up to 40,000 time steps. For each image, we used ImageJ to calculate the relative porosity of the microstructure. Starting at an initial porosity of 33%, or a relative density of 66%, we were able to see an increase to approximately 78% relative density by 40,000 time steps. The trend we obtained followed that of the densification given by Oleski's group, though at a significantly slower rate. A possible source of this discrepancy may be due to the different ratios of grain growth to pore migration to pore annihilation attempts per time step. Our code only accounted for 1 pore annihilation attempt rather than increasing as the Monte Carlo time steps progressed.
The raw materials used for fabrication were 2-micron alpha-phase silicon carbide powder mixed with 2% aluminum oxide and 5% yttrium oxide, which acted as sintering agents. Each batch of powder was suspended in 150 milliliters of ethanol, and 100 grams of yttria-stabilized zirconia milling balls were placed inside. Each batch was then placed on a nutrition mill for 27 hours. They were then placed in a 100 Celsius degree oven overnight. The resulting powder was ground with mortar and pestle and taken to ARL to be sintered. Each sample consisted of 4 grams of powder inside a 1-inch diameter graphite die. The samples were then sintered using the temperature profile given by the patent with an additional soak at 700 degrees Celsius to ensure accurate temperature measurements. In the end, 3 samples were produced, each with a 1-inch diameter and a thickness of 1/8 of an inch.
To characterize our samples, we use 2 approaches. First, we use Raman spectroscopy to confirm the growth of graphene within our samples. This is a relatively simple technique that is commonly used to study graphene, and simply correlates Raman shifts with compounds in the sample. Secondly, we performed hardness testing to test the mechanical properties of our samples. Silicon carbide is an extremely hard material, and many indenters can't properly quantify its hardness. We chose a Vickers hardness test using 30 kilograms force with a 10-second hold, measuring the diagonals and calculating the Vickers hardness number. Our Raman results were excellent as they confirmed graphene presence in our samples with peaks around 2700 and 1500, which are commonly associated with graphene, along with large peaks indicating silicon carbide. Our hardness values were not as high as patent samples, and this is likely due to the fact that our available processing did not yield fully dense samples, and a longer sintering time resulted in poor hardness due to grain growth. Future testing may hopefully include Raman mapping, SEM imaging, and additional mechanical testing on fully dense samples.
In conclusion, we determined that epitaxial graphene can form between 1200 C and 2200 C, depending on the vacuum pressure. Our SPS model accurately simulated joule heating, however densification predictions deviated from the experimental results. While we confirmed the presence of graphene, mechanical testing was inconclusive due to fabrication limitations. Looking forward, an MD simulation of silicon sublimation and graphene formation would be useful. The grain growth algorithm can also be run for different microstructures and for more time steps. SPS fabrication using the correct parameters would also give valuable information on our densification results. Intensive mechanical testing is also required to determine the potential of these composites for high strength and high toughness applications such as body armor. Modeling can also be used to optimize the SPS process. We would like to give special thanks to individuals from the Army Research Lab, San Diego State University, Georgia Institute of Technology, and University of Maryland Material Science faculty and staff for their expertise and help this semester.